The good, the bad, and the ugly of dressing vintage. This video is in no way meant to be interpreted or construed as being boastful, to brag, or to be vain or arrogant, but simply a testimony of my experiences when dressing retro or vintage. I certainly don't consider myself to be a raving beauty, nor do I have a very low self-esteem about myself either. Even though I'm happily married to my husband, it still feels nice to receive a compliment regarding my clothing, especially if it's something I've made. It also motivates me to create more things, and sprinkles fertilizer on my self-esteem, so to speak. With my personal style, I find that people will either compliment my outfit, flash me a pleasant smile when we make eye contact, or they will just look appreciatively, but may say nothing at all. To the onlookers, I typically smile back politely and continue on my way. The compliments that I've received in the past usually have the earmarks of, "You look nice," "I love your dress," "That's a pretty dress." To all of these, I simply say thank you, or so do you. I enjoy wearing the garments I make, and receiving a compliment on my hard work makes the time and labor I've spent all the more worthwhile. If I'm not pressured for time, I won't hesitate to say, "Thanks, I made it," which is usually an invitation to ask me more questions as to whether or not I make and sell items for other people. They would tell me that their grandmother used to sew, or that they wish they knew how to sew. I've had some really positive, heartwarming conversations with complete strangers, and overall, my experiences have been great. But let's talk about the bad. I'm fortunate that I don't have many negative experiences when dressing retro or vintage. But I can't deny that I have had some rather catty looks thrown my way. When I started making my own clothes, I made a promise to myself. When leaving the house, and if possible, be sure to wear an article of clothing that is me-made. On a mild spring day, with my arms grocery-laden, I trudged out of the supermarket and headed towards my car parked in the South 40 of the parking lot. My eyes focused on the pavement. I looked up in time to see a woman walking past. For the briefest of moments, our eyes met. The look and expression on her face was that of a cornered feline, claws out, ready to strike. Okay, that may be a little bit of an exaggeration, but her eyes were shooting daggers at me. How was I not supposed to be taken aback? Wondering how she could possibly be looking at me, a complete stranger nonetheless, as though every fiber of my being had wholeheartedly offended her. But when her eyes raked the length of me, I soon understood why. To put it bluntly, she was either jealous or at the very least liked my outfit, and thought it looked nice, but was perhaps too full of pride to say something about it. And that's okay. Or perhaps she thought it looked nicer than hers. I'm a non-confrontational person, so I smiled at her, and yes, politely, and continued on my way. As everyone knows, hindsight is always 20/20, so to wipe that nasty look off her face, I should have given her a compliment, even after she shot me a nasty look. I realize you weren't expecting me to say that, and that's the point. I love doing things that are unexpected. Up until now, I haven't mentioned what this woman in question looked like. And there isn't much to report, simply because her beauty was not that much greater or lesser than mine. Her clothes weren't exactly trendy, maybe only a few years out of date. But after all, I was dressed straight out of the 1950s, so I don't really have much room to talk. And hey, at least she wasn't scuffing the heels of her pink fuzzy house slippers across the pavement, dressed in PJs, a bathrobe, and no bra. Experience number 2. So let me relate to you an experience that I had that maybe wasn't so great. And now in hindsight, it may not have been directly related to my style per se. I mean, it still had something to do with my clothing, but just hear me out. In the smoked barbecue buffet line at a friend's wedding, I grabbed 1 out of 2 squeeze bottles of barbecue sauce to slather my pulled pork sandwich. I squeezed the bottle to distribute the sauce. After a few fruitless attempts, I abandoned that bottle for the other. The woman opposite me, on the other side of the buffet table, grabbed the squeeze bottle that I had very recently abandoned. Okay, so I fully admit that I should have communicated to this woman better about the nozzle of the bottle being clogged. But in my defense, the next few seconds went by in a bit of a blur, and I didn't have time to stop her because I figured that her common sense would eventually kick in. But perhaps I was wrong. The next thing I know, her side of the buffet line has come to a complete halt. I looked over to see her hunched over her plate, the barbecue sauce bottle grasped in both hands as she's hunched over her plate. And she's squeezing with immense pressure. With each sauceless attempt, she increases the pressure. Behind me in line are paused, curiously watching with bated breath, watching her attempts in anticipation of what's going to happen. Suddenly, with a pop, the cap on the bottle goes soaring into the air and out of sight. And who knows where it actually landed. Meanwhile, the reddish-brown liquid fart splats all down the front of her, ruining her 2000s fashion bug purchase, Hillary Clinton-inspired power suit. Without skipping a beat, she catches me in the crosshairs of her sights. Her eyes rake the entire length of me, taking in my off-shoulder cornflower blue peasant top, matching cotton batik full gathered skirt complete with a puffy petticoat. "Well, that just happened," she bit out, pinning me with a scathing glare, as she mopped barbecue sauce off her power suit with a postage stamp-sized napkin. And with that, she dashed away to the restroom to repair any damage she could to her power suit. In hindsight, I do wish I had communicated to her better about the faulty barbecue sauce bottle, which also makes me realize that in relationships closer to me, at times I can be pretty poor at communicating. I'm typically not one to laugh at others' misfortunes, but who honestly makes that poor of a choice without considering the consequences? I mean, what if somehow the barbecue sauce had gotten all over the bride's gown? I would feel completely terrible if I had ruined on the wedding day a bride's gown. I'm not willing to put my marriage in jeopardy over something that can be changed so easily. So I sat down with my husband and asked him to critique my style. He started off by acknowledging the effort I put forth into my style, and was appreciative of the fact that I enjoy dressing conservatively. So what I could collect of his opinion was that he didn't disapprove of my style at all, but rather liked it. I realize I'm fortunate when I say that he hardly ever critiques my clothing, and never has he asked me to change, or says that things I wear are inappropriate. The only time he will say something about my clothing is generally my footwear. My footwear. Believe it or not. Whether or not my choice in footwear is going to last an entire day of walking. How to address the negative attention? Do the opposite. I love doing the opposite of what people are expecting of me. When people are giving me the most nasty, catty, scathing looks, I just smile back at them. I'll say something like, "Hello, how are you?" I'll say it in an upbeat and cheery way. Or I'll say something like, "I hope the rest of your day goes well." Or I simply won't acknowledge them as I walk by, but never will I feed into their negativity. Fashion is an expression of art as well as self-expression. Fashion can make us feel empowered or more in touch with our inner self, and can also make us feel more confident in the way that we present ourselves, especially if our clothing authentically represents our personality, our identity, or our mood. And if dressing vintage or retro makes you happy, then do it. I've gotten some interesting questions when it comes to my style. Questions such as, do you have any reservations about dressing retro or vintage? Do you feel you'd stand apart from the crowd too much? Do you feel people would make assumptions about your lifestyle choice? And how do you start dressing retro? Personally, I've never been much of a follower when it comes to fashion trends, so I don't mind setting myself apart from the crowd in a positive way. When I'm wearing retro or vintage clothing, I feel great. I feel pretty, feminine, girly, confident, and I find the vintage classic style looks universally flattering on a lot of different body types. So why not give it a try? So that's where vintage style, not vintage values, comes into play. Dandy Wellington came up with a very interesting phrase. Though my style may be old-timey, but my values on social issues are not. Personally, because of the way I dress, I've never had anybody assume that I have traditional or old world views on gender roles. But it also goes without saying that I still don't appreciate it when people ask me, don't you wish you were born in a different era? And to that I say, absolutely not. We have come a long way towards gender equality. I also love having my right to be able to vote. And as Bernadette Banner mentioned, having access to the polio vaccine. Or freely being able to earn my own living. But this isn't to say that having traditional opinions on gender roles isn't okay. It certainly is. And if you find your calling in being a housewife, a stay-at-home mom, or a stay-at-home husband, then that's definitely okay. Check out Rachel Maxey's video about being born in the wrong era and misconceptions about dressing vintage. And as usual, her videos do not disappoint. Don't fall. Well, there's some activity here at the park, so I think they're putting their potluck away. Their potluck party of two, I think, with their crock pot and rolling luggage crock pot thing. Yeah, I only ever saw 2 people show up to the potluck, so I mean, did you really need to come to the park with your crock pot to have a picnic? I mean, I totally would have done that too, but I mean, that could be an interesting thing to do, really. Maybe more so, I would like heat up a cast iron Dutch oven and like make some really awesome chili in there, and then like bring the cast iron with the chili in it. And of course, it's all about the presentation, so you gotta serve it in cast iron. Yeah, I'd totally do that. Just be all cooking up some chili in a cast iron Dutch oven and bring it to the park for a potluck. That sounds good. That sounds really good, actually. I'm really interested in some chili weather. Chili. Chili. I don't really like cornbread with my chili, but these kids are getting really loud. After the motorcycle is done, and I must be sitting on an anthill because there's a lot of ants crawling around here. And with each sauceless attempt, she increases the pleasure. Pleasure? Oh my gosh, what did I just say?